Welcome to the Astrology Hub Podcast. This is our flagship show dedicated to sharing the multitude of astrological perspectives and approaches. We feature up-and-coming astrologers as well as living legends in the field and connect you with experts and thought leaders in fields related to astrology, demonstrating how astrology can support you in so many areas of your life. Today, we have two very special guests, and we're going to be diving into 2022 and beyond. I love these two because they are definitely going to give us that bigger perspective that's going to help us get out of the minutia of what's happening right now and see things from a broader perspective. So I would love to welcome both Russ and Shannon to the show. Russ von Olhausen is an internationally recognized researcher, astrologer, writer, and consciousness catalyzer, a student of Buddhist, Hermetic, and Christian philosophies, and having lived briefly in Tibet, his work echoes a spiritual undertone synthesized with a longtime study of science, religion, myth, metaphysics, and most importantly, nature. Shannon Gill synthesizes evolutionary astrology, Jungian psychology, dance, and ritual to create an alchemical healing experience for clients and groups. She received her degree in Buddhist psychology at Naropa University in Boulder and has certifications from the Archetypal Academy in the complete course of evolutionary astrology. And together, so these two have a very special alchemy between the two of them, which is just such a delight to experience. I actually heard them on another podcast and went, oh my gosh, I love these two. I'd love to have them on our show. So together, they work with the concept of celestial embodiment through head, heart, and hands, rooted in sacred dance and ceremony. All right, Shannon and Russ, welcome to the Astrology Hub Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, what an honor.
Yeah,
It's so happy to be here.
An honor for us as well. And because this is your Astrology Hub debut, I would love to take a little time to learn about your story, how you came to become practicing astrologers, and then how did you two begin working together?
I'll let you take the lead on that.
Yeah, whenever I'm asked this question, I often feel that this is an ancient reemergence of something that I've been doing for lifetimes. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, so certainly I'm looking at the eternal nature of the soul. In this lifetime, I would say that, like many of us, I was sort of thrust into the underworld. I have 5 planets in the 8th house of Scorpio. And, so that was my initiation, I feel, into the process of evolution that I had to experience for myself to survive, really, as a young person. And so I had, started having these spiritual awakenings, which were exactly contrasting the depth of the underworld that I was traversing. I went through a lot of intense things, like many of us do, and it just kind of sent me on my path and on my journey. And actually, it's interesting because I experienced many different types of therapy, but the one element that really brought me back to life was music. And more specifically bass. And so I was like a teenager, driving around in my car, and I had like the big woofers in the back of my trunk, and nice. Born and raised in Austin, Texas, just escaping from my parents. And so there was something happening in today's modern world that was very ancient. And so come to find out that there was an actual study in music therapy. So I went to Incarnate Word in San Antonio, which was the first school in Texas that had music therapy. And I started on my path of understanding, honestly, multidimensionality, because I started learning about frequency and the connection between the mind, the body, and the beyond. And then I was there for a while, and I got to my 3rd year, and it was all about composition, and I was totally over my head. So I jumped ship and went to Naropa in Boulder, which I had on my radar for master's degree. And I spent another 3 years there going deep into Buddhist psychology, because I realized that the mind was this other issue with happiness. And I was stuck in these loops. And so I got a degree in Buddhist psychology, which then was integrating now into the music therapy, and I brought the dance and the embodiment. And then from there, I just, my first astrology teacher says that the first planet to rise in your chart is your ruling planet, not necessarily the ruler of the ascendant, right? Which so many people always think of that as your ruling planet. And my first planet to rise is Jupiter. And so I'm a lifelong student, and it's in the 11th house. So I went on to the Archetypal Academy and started understanding more of a languaging around multidimensionality, and astrology came in, and then it just sort of took me in that direction. I met Maurice Fernandez. I'd love to just give honor to Maurice. He was a guest at my school one day in Boulder, which we're in teepees, and it was just this really unique experience. And I knew that day, I was like, this is my path. Well, when somebody gave me my first reading, actually, and was able to construct the darkness that I had been in my life in a way that made me realize it was on the other side of it was my power. Yeah. Speaking of the Scorpio emphasis in my life, I knew that day that already being on a counseling track, that was something that was such an accelerating force, such an accelerated doorway into the soul. And so I immediately just entered into the program, and so I follow, I guess, my own journey. And then now we're in a place of integrating all of it. And we have a very magical story, which is for another time. But Russell and I were brought together again from many lifetimes of being together as one flame in 2015 in a very magical way. We met at a Rick Levine workshop, which is, thank you, Rick.
At Naomi Bennett's house. Yeah.
So we
another
magical. I mean, Rick is so magical.
He's the wizard. I know.
He kind of whipped this. He was part of this.
Yeah. I mean, we have a mythical kind of love, and I'm an archetypal and evolutionary astrologer. I understand myself as the universe, and so we like to try to translate from that vantage point and that lens through the astrological and psychological world.
Nice. Amazing. Okay. That's a brilliant story. What about you, Russ?
Well, the first thing you said was in this lifetime. And I said, well, why stick to just this lifetime? The story started a long time ago, really. And Shannon and I cooked this one up in ancient Egypt. We said, hey, what if we do this thing in the future as we're getting closer to the age of Aquarius? Let's do this thing where we go and live at a pyramid again. But first we have to get there through this ancient alchemical process of magic, of which Rick was a part of, So, we're working with these tools. We brought ourselves back together in this story to begin this process. So I don't know if I'm just going to do a tangent here. We actually are living now at a pyramid.
Wow.
On our property here in Wimberley in Central Texas, that is aligned at 29.55 degrees north latitude, the same as the pyramids in Egypt, in Giza. So we're talking magic upon magic. I'm serious about it. We whipped this up millennia ago. This is how ancient magic works. But as far as this lifetime, I came into this world very Uranian. I have Uranus at exactly midheaven. I figured we needed a lot of lightning to get things jump started around here, So, so bringing that in, Uranus at exactly at midheaven, the forces of change have always played a part in my life, and I was adopted as a child. I had a really strange Sagittarius uprising, rising up, and an uprising. So rising during my upbringing, I did a lot of things in life, and I learned a lot. But one of the things that always stuck with me as a child was numbers and pattern. I was very keen on that, and I grew up at the time when the Gemini missions and the Apollo missions were, and so I was steeped in the myths, and I always wanted to know what that was about. So at a very young age, I was jumping on the astrology bandwagon through the channel of mythology. And then, and I'll just throw this out there. So I was a Dungeons and Dragons player when I was 12 years old. I brought it from Dallas to this little small town, and I eventually got thrown out because of that, with the very Christian Bible thing. But my name was Zodiac, at
Whoa.
age 12. So I must have had some premonition, Jupiter return, that things were going to happen this way. So, yeah. So moving forward, I studied like a good Sag rising would. I studied all the philosophies. I went deep into Christian Hermeticism. I even called myself an atheist for about 6 weeks. Just to try that out, and then I came back around and I found that Buddhism was what I recognized as having the most compassion for the self and for each other. And it eventually took me to Tibet, and I did some work there briefly, and I learned a lot. And I feel like I reconnected with one, if not many, of my past lives. And I learned a little bit about Tibetan astrology, through that channel as well. So then I came back, and then I moved to Austin from where I was up near Dallas, Texas. And this place is a conscious core here. And it does this mix of people. I don't know if you've heard a little bit about Austin. We've got a lot going on down here, Yes. It's a vortex of conscious energy, and it's drawing in crazy amount of the right type of people to change the world. Look, Elon Musk just moved here, So it's like there's something happening here, literally. But anyway, through this process, I got involved in astrology, and I founded the Astrological Society of Austin in 2005, along with Donna Woodwell. We were co-creators in that process. And then I began to study a little bit more about the science behind astrology, and eventually I ended up becoming the president of the organization that I helped found, and eventually met her at the Rick Levine conference. And since then, we've just started this whole other journey that is more about conscious raising than anything else. Mm-hmm. Astrology is the language that underlies it all. And I think that's my whole mission and purpose and focus, and why on the planet I ended up in this place, and what we're doing today. So
brilliant. Oh my gosh. I have so many questions. Yeah. Starting with the pyramid, of course.
Yeah, it's right? Crazy. It's crazy.
How did you build this pyramid, or was it there? And what are you experiencing as the benefit of like spending a bunch of time in a pyramid?
Yeah. So, well, we were running a retreat center in Austin, actually, for the last 5 years, Lotus Bend. And we heard about a pyramid about 45 minutes out of town. So of course, I'm just thinking, no, wait a minute. And so we had to go and find out what's going on over here. So we actually just came for a visit and met the owners. And it's basically as a retreat center. It's 30 acres. It's a yoga retreat center named Samadhi, which of course is that, that bliss state, which is what we're all trying to attain. Mm-hmm. And long story short, he and I had a pretty amazing recognition, and he invited me to do my work here. At the time, it was really focused on the ecstatic dance ceremonies that I do. I founded the ecstatic dance movement in Boulder and Denver in 2005 and 6. And so we started basically recreating these ancient, archetypal ecstatic dance, experiences. And then COVID hit. And so we obviously stopped, expressing, and he ended up inviting us to move on out here, just like a few months ago. And we, it's one of those things where you can hop timelines. Yeah. Russell literally said to me one day, what if Lotus Bend wasn't here anymore, which is the retreat center we were at? And I said, well, we would do this somewhere else, And it was almost like we opened because I had thought we would have been at Lotus Bend forever, we loved the place. Yeah. And so it was very sort of focused there. And as soon as we opened our awareness, because, it's almost like post 2020, all bets are off. We need to be available to hop ship or change course or nature calls. Right. And so it was interesting. Like we learned something in that moment of like, let's just wait. What if there's something else? What if there's something more? And literally like 2 weeks later, he invited us to come out here. We're building a house right next to the pyramid. We're temple keepers, and wow.
So there's a little more to that story. There's a prologue. I love how the time bounces around. So when I first moved to Austin, I came back from Tibet. I lost all my money. I got called down here by the Bohemian conscious community, and I found myself living on this exact same hill across the street in the middle of nowhere. We're like 45 miles actually south of Austin, and this pyramid had not been built yet. And then 20 years later, this year, we end up back on this hill, literally across the street from where I lived. where a pyramid is built.
Wow.
So that is the God's honest truth. And it's happening on the same north latitude line as pyramids of Giza. So,
well, and that's also the Big Island latitude line, right? Hawaii isn't the Big Island the same?
well, that's 1947, and that's even more important. I talk about this all the time because it has to do with the tetrahedral structure within the planet Earth. You know, the double tetrahedron, the Star of David. There's a matrix, and you can go to each one of these points. It is 19.47 at the right where the volcano is. You know,
right.
And that's the hot spot, but that's the corner of the tetrahedron. So there is something actually magical and physical happening with that too, because I love how sacred geometry works. You know,
yes, it's amazing. You know, my daughter was studying ancient Egypt this last year. And so we watched the pyramid codes on Gaia. And that was my first experience with getting, you know, very interesting philosophies about what the pyramids were actually built for and why, you know, why did they, where did they come from and why did they invest so much in building these huge structures? And it's fascinating. It's just.
Well, I just wanted to share this because this comes from Hawaii. This is the Nassim Haramein arc crystal. You've probably seen one of these before. These are grown on the island of Hawaii by Nassim Haramein, the astrophysicist, and he's doing work with sacred geometry. And for 2.5 years, and they are cut. Well, they came to Austin with the intent that these are grown in a toroidal field that they create at that particular point. Wow. And so they came to Austin and seeded us as the first conscious core for the crystal matrix network of 5D consciousness. And they've been selling these across the planet, but these come from there because of that reason.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay. Well, so I want to dive into 2022 because I have a feeling that your perspective is going to be probably a very unique one for us to be able to tap into as we're looking forward to 2022. What are you sensing? Like, what are you paying attention to in the astrology? And what do you think the major theme or invitation is?
So as we spoke of briefly before, I think what we like to focus on is sort of drawing back our perspective to a much larger scale and back in history and looking at cycles within cycles and understanding that it's much more helpful, I think, and easier to understand what's going on in the micro if we understand the macro, right?
Yes.
And so it's interesting because, like Russell said, he's got Uranus at the exact, midheaven. Well, I have 0 degrees Aquarius rising, and so I have felt that I'm such this child or birth, mouth of the Aquarian age, and so what we know is that we're coming out of this long Pisces age into this age of Aquarius. And that is really the cauldron that we're in. This is really what I think is so helpful for my students and my clients to understand that this is an epoch of time that we're simultaneously dying to and birthing. And so understanding, first of all, the ages is super, I think, empowering, and also understanding evolution itself, as an evolutionary astrologer, and astrology itself is oriented towards the seasons. I tell my children, and I work with children, we can't have summer without winter. And so how do we evolve? It's actually through that very natural process of death and rebirth. So that can give us a little faith and trust into understanding why when things look so dark, which at this moment they do on the planet in a lot of ways, it's actually absolutely natural and, more importantly, necessary. So understanding, what a little bit more, you don't have to understand even that much about what's the difference in the paradigm between the Pisces and the Aquarian age. Well, we can just look at the glyphs. We can look at, the glyph of Pisces is the 2 fish swimming in opposite directions. So what does that represent? That represents a split between spirit and matter, duality, right? So there was a misconception of a separation. So it's often called the age of the illusion of separation. It corresponds with the Kali Yuga as well, like the age of darkness. Well, what is the darkness? It is just a disappearance of the light. And so in some ways we can see it through compassionate eyes of just an amnesic state of not remembering our connection to the one, to the light. So what's very exciting about being at the cusp of this new age is that if we understand that we're coming out of this age of duality, separation, then where are we moving? We're moving back into the Purusha, which is the one mind consciousness, which is that remembrance or that awakening. You know, we often hear in the conscious community of people talking about the spiritual evolution or the spiritual awakening or the ascension process. It's all different languaging for the same thing, really, which is a remembering of our unity consciousness, that we're not separate, that we're not, islands, that we're actually one energetic organism. And so when we're coming back, when we're birthing into this, we're at the cusp, we're birthing into this new age. The new paradigm of the Aquarian age is about the unification of duality, the return of the divine androgyne. That's why there's so much in the zeitgeist about, the elevation of the divine feminine and the integration of masculine and feminine, the light and the dark. We've been doing such shadow work for, all the people that are awake on this conscious path, because we understand on this sort of micro level that we're trying to unify and come back into, from the state of multiplicity back into the singularity. So whenever we talk about, the aspects, it's really important to understand that there's different levels and different vantage points to go into them. And so it makes a lot more sense to understand one particular, say square, to understand, well, what is the larger picture here, and where are we going in the next in the next decades? And so, do you want to say anything before we go into more specifics?
Well, I mean, since you're taking that view, I was, I wanted to put this in context of like a mental science, how we relate these different transits, these smaller transits of like oscillations in the field, vibratory field interactions. So you have these smaller transits that are coming up, but there's these larger ones that are affecting the field as well. And, so we're talking about the age change, where we're going from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. This is a massive shift. It's affecting all of these other changes, all these other transits that we would normally go through. They're happening faster and with more intensity because we're in this other process of this shift of the age. So keeping that in mind, in context of how these things are, like we're literally shifting into 5D consciousness, and it's disrupting the field even more. On an atomic level, some people cannot handle it. Other people are going to be affected by it in a way that's going to make them very submissive and subdued. And other people are going to be radicalized by this shift. Like there's going to be these extremes. And so when you think of it in these contexts, like what's happening overall in human consciousness, and you can see what's going to happen. We'll talk about the transits here in just a second, but you can see this as an increase of vibration that's going to affect a larger and larger change that's happening. So, yeah.
Question
Sure.
For you, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So you're talking about shifting into 5D consciousness, and we hear that like quite a bit right now.
Right.
And even, a few years ago, we started to hear that was what we humans in this planet are in the process of doing. My question is, how do you define 5D consciousness? And then how do we know? Like, is there anything from an astrological perspective showing us that this shift is happening? Or is that more from a consciousness perspective? So what is it and how do we know? Those are my two questions.
So I'll address this astrologically first, I was thinking of this process that we are actually moving from these, it happens internally with the signs on a smaller scale, but looking at it in the context of the ages. So we had the two fish going in the opposite direction. Spirit and matter kind of lost their way, and they're gone to extremes, both at different times. Spirituality took over for the first 1,000 years and became ultra religious, and then now science has turned everything into matter. But now we're beginning to see that that process does not work anymore. We can't continue either one of those extremes. We have to come back and recognize this process is changing. So as we move into the age of the polarity between Aquarius and Leo, what you see, what I'm envisioning is like the fractal pieces of a mirror begin to come back together so we can see ourselves more clearly. And what we see is that the polar opposite, the higher self within, the lion that's on the opposite side of the pole of Aquarius. So we begin to see that God self for what it is. We're like, hey, wait a minute. My God self is inside of you. I'm not going to hurt you like I did before. I'm not going to treat the world the way that I did before, because I see God in everything now more clearly. And that's what's happening. But it's a painful process to shake off ego this way. Ego is going to take a huge thing in 5D consciousness. That's part of what's happening. So, yeah.
So, I mean, this is fascinating. Do you think that there are different, like, do you think everyone's going into this 5D consciousness, or do you think that there's like some people are going there, others aren't? I mean, how?
Yeah.
Well, we won't stay on this too long, but as far as the process, it's a purification process. We're at this concentration of separation from the wheat from the chaff. Mm-hmm. Not everything is wheat, and a large part of it's going to fall away. It's going to be a constriction process that's going to refine what's pure and what's not. And most of everything, unfortunately, in the age of Pisces has taken on too much ego self, and it's going to be shaken off.
And I think I often can refer to just the levels of evolution that we learn about in evolutionary astrology, right? The consensus, the individuated, and then the spiritual, in a way that you could look at those as an ascension journey. Because if we think about the consensus mindset, are you familiar with those?
Not really, but I can kind of intuit what they would be.
Okay, it's like one of the foundational studies when you enter into the evolutionary astrology world, and it's understanding the levels of consciousness, right? The consensus level is kind of like the matrix, right? And we can kind of understand that. It's just, right, we're separate, it's all ego, it's, it's all out for yourself. There's no orientation towards the unification. In the individuated phase, you start to wake up out of that and you start to do sort of some work, and you having a witnessing self, like, to understand, like from a psychological or a Buddhist perspective of looking down and being like, wow, I'm not just my ego. Now I'm watching my ego, right? Now I'm like, wow, I'm an egomaniac, or wow, I have all these wounds. And, and becomes like the cauldron of transformation, right? We're healing our stuff, and we're trying to figure out and unhook from story and all the stuff. And then the fifth dimensional state is where there is no more separation from the ego. Everything has fused into the one. And that's where, sometimes we have this experience of feeling like we are the universe. I know it sounds really crazy, but it's like, I sometimes experience everything at once through the eyes of the divine. They're just experiences. Then I fall back into 4D, and I'm like, oh, I'm agitated. It's one thing to have the concept of 5-dimensional reality and be able to talk about it. It's another thing to live there. But we are in such an exciting time because it's totally available. Yeah. And post 2020, I've seen so many of my clients start channeling and start really experiencing and co-creating in this 5th dimensional experience, which is waking up to the divinity within, which is that Purusha state, which is the return of Christ consciousness, however we want to think about it, the divine, basically us operating from that creative, unlimited creative source. Mm-hmm. And that is that 5th dimensional experience. Now, when enough of us can get to that state, then that's when we are actually going to see more of a collective shift. And we're seeing like little portals happen all over the planet that are starting to raise this sort of earth grid to these higher frequencies. To
quote an article I read earlier today, it reminded me of this, what you're talking about. It's The Sleeper Awakens by Frank Herbert in Dune. That was one of the main themes. The whole story was about this ultra consciousness awakening, and he was a student of Carl Jung, so he applied these same ideas to that theme and that myth. And what we're talking about is the great mind awakening, the Purusha concept of the Vedic higher consciousness. Yeah.
One thing that actually Rick Levine, let's bring him back, in 2020, one of the things, because we have him on the show once a week, we're doing the Cosmic Connection, and he kept asking us to question how we know what we know. Like, where did it come from? Who told us it? Like, and that whole process has been so fascinating to just be like, wait, I think that, but I don't actually know that. Like, someone told me that when I was 5, and I've just been parroting it, as truth, but like, that's actually maybe not true.
Yeah. And so that's an example of the Sag Gemini nodal axis, the collective evolutionary growth leap for us is to be in a more of a Gemini state, which is questioning, seeing there's more than one truth, right? Instead of us holding this crucible of the Sagittarius self node of we know what's going on, says who? Yeah, like you said, and that's a brilliant thing to be questioning.
It's fascinating and disorienting, and I can see exactly what you're saying with this falling off process that we're in now, and it's uncomfortable because there's these things that we've become attached to, but we have to let go of them in order to go wherever we're going, which to me seems like kind of a wild adventure. Like I'm like, totally. I don't know where we're going, but this is crazy.
We signed up for it.
Yeah, we signed up for it. Exactly. And that always is like, okay, there's a reason why we, all of us, including all of you listening and watching, are here right now. You opted in. You're like, I'm in for this. I'm ready for this.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go. So we have this larger framework of this shift from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius, this like spirit versus matter in conflict with each other versus this unity consciousness, which is what we're going towards.
Right.
What else are we looking for? If we can maybe drill down into 2022, what part of the journey will 2022 bring about?
Great. Just a couple more points to bring us to current, because that was a big leap of 2,000 years.
Bring it into the last 24 months.
I like to think back actually to the 60s, right?
Yes.
That's the Pluto-Uranus conjunction, right? It was sort of the beginning of the awakening and the Cultural Revolution, right? Then speed up 2012 through 2017, that was also this massive time with the square of Pluto-Uranus. Pluto meaning the underworld, the shadow unearthing, and then Uranus like trying to draw us upward, draw us into an enlightenment state, teaching us the direct correlation between dark and light. And so if we think in ourselves back to 2012 through 2017, most of us went through massive change on the 3D, on the material, on the spiritual and the emotional, right? This was preparing us for 2020. And 2020 to us feels like it was sort of this like, okay, we've arrived, right? Here we are, right? And those 3 planets, like I love Anne, she's like the COVID clan, here's the party showing up in the Capricorn. Your days are over, patriarchy. And then it was the beginning of the great revealing, right? With Jupiter there, bringing the light into the Pluto, dark, corrupt of the Saturn authority, all the system, no judgment, just whatever alchemy happening, right? And so we're still very much in that, right? So this is the thing, and COVID, I think of everything as metaphor or as archetype or as energy. And so the way I see COVID is, well, first of all, I love that it means crown. Russell's an etymologist, and it means crown, which is, it's like the contrast to open our crown chakra, because what we're trying to do is become a toroidal field of energy, remembering our unification with the divine, which comes in this new Aquarian age, which is the return to the one, which is our divinity, right? So we had to go through some massive darkness if we're going to go through it globally to have a massive awakening. And so COVID is like a surface wave to help propel us forward. Go ahead.
I just want to say, we don't even judge the viruses here. It's like everyone has a purpose. And so the virus is doing something here for human consciousness as well. And when you can think in those terms, it's like, you're like, wait a minute, that you just eliminate the fear. Try to think through why is this happening, and why is it viral, and why is there this reaction, and whatever your opinion is about any of this. What's happening we don't even want to judge that idea that there's a virus right now, so don't go into fear over it first. And so that's a way to seed your stopping division between each other. We don't need to fear any of this right now,
Right, because if we again understand that we're trying to reemerge into a unification of duality, then there's got to be intelligence in the darkness, or it could be perceived as death, right? Death. And so what I always like to think of is, if we look at everything from through eternal eyes, that we're eternal, then there is some magic and some medicine and something that's thrusting us forward. We're taking a quantum leap in evolution right now because of the contrast, which looks like this deadly virus. It's wild.
It's really interesting, because as you've been speaking, I keep thinking of all the places that look like the exact opposite of what you're describing. So when you're talking about unity, it's like, but we're so separate and we're so polarized, and you're talking about eternity, but we're really dealing with mortality. I mean, we're dealing with all of our issues around mortality. So it's like all these things have been, I've often felt throughout this period of time that it's almost like caricatures. Like it's like it's like a drama unfolding and everything is really exaggerated.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, there's a reason for that. It's because we're getting to see it really, really clearly. Like, wow, I'm so afraid of death. Wow, I'm so afraid of being controlled. Wow, I'm so afraid of a person that I can't control. Wow, I'm so, all these things that we've gotten to see, like, this is all alive in us. It's all buried in us somewhere. And all these experiences are just like drudging them up from the depths.
Totally.
So that, like you said, that we can add them to the cauldron and we can start burning them off and we can start experiencing something totally new here.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a mass awakening. And, I always tell my clients, we don't often wake up in the morning and say, hey, it's a great day to evolve. No, like,
that.
Absolutely not. We are forced into it through trauma, pain, loss, betrayal, you name it. So we're going through it globally right now. And so
how do you deal, like you two, when people go, because there is a lot of suffering, right? I mean, there's a lot of suffering right now. And so how do you stay in your bodies and compassionate for the experience that we as humanity are having, and anchored in that view of the bigger why? And do you ever find it hard to maintain both of them at the same time?
Oh yeah.
And do you ever feel like misunderstood for seeing it from the eternal view? Like, do sometimes people go, well, you don't understand because it's really hard. Like there's people dying, or there's, lots of, awful things happening.
Yeah.
How do you resolve those things?
Well, I'll just ping off of something you said a minute ago about fear of mortality. So I like to use just the straight math behind that. If something is true, compare its opposite. Then what does it mean not to fear mortality? Because you are immortal. If you can remember that is true and hold that in your true nature, and it's not a bypassing, it's remembering, I am also the immortal side of this. Yes, take that breath in.
That's okay. That's going back to what Shannon was saying earlier about when we can go into that darkness. That's also where our power is.
Yeah.
So you just illuminated that by looking and being like, wow, I'm afraid of death. Just owning that, seeing that, feeling it, it enables the realization of immortality.
Yeah.
And another thing to understand about the spiritual awakening, which most people probably do, is that it is the death of the ego. So when the ego fears its demise, it puts up a huge fight. So the fight and the fear and all of that is often just this aspect of our consciousness that is not anything like our true essence and our true being, because from God consciousness, we know that we're eternal. We know that we're in union. So the collective psyche is very destabilized right now because it's being thrust into a place of uncomfortability because we've been kind of coasting along, in a lot of ways. And our system has given us a perceived sense of security. Well, since Neptune entered Pisces, it's like, the only true security comes from within. And we've been trying to warn you, like we're about to pull the rug out from under, right? And so now we're here. And honestly, that's really the bottom line, is that we must ascend to those higher states of consciousness to stay sane, honestly, because if we want to exist, if we exist down here in the 3D dross, why everything is going through deterioration and in the cauldron, it's totally destabilizing. Yeah.
That Neptune in Pisces fog has been absolutely fascinating to have as like the backdrop as we're navigating all these really big things, making huge decisions, like being thrust into so much change and then not being able to see. Like I used to be able to look ahead like 5 years and be like, here's what I'll be doing. Here's a plan. Now I'm like, I have no idea.
Right.
A big blank slate,
right? Well, that's its job.
Yeah.
There's a part of your immortality you're not supposed to see as you. So the Neptune's job is like, don't get too excited. We're not going to show you your whole future. Just, you're going to have to follow the spiritual way, the Neptunian Piscean way, to get through this. That's the faith part. You cannot rely just on mind alone and intellect alone. You have to know yourself as God. You have to let go of that rational side. And that's your ego.
And Amanda, does it not just get more and more magical whenever we trust?
It does. And that's that process of getting to the place of trust and surrender.
Right.
When you were speaking earlier, I can't remember at what point I was thinking about riding the current of life. Like there's this like current or stream of life that we're being invited to really like surrender to and just go, okay, I'm on the stream of life and I'm allowing it to take me where it wants to go.
But it's also like a light stream, like a laser. It's becoming coherent, becoming more focused and concentrated. You got to think of it. It's a nice wavy stream, but it's starting to take focus and have a purpose and go someplace. You got to remember that. Yeah. So add that to the equation that you're riding a quicker and quicker stream of light consciousness.
Well, that's all coming from the Pisces waters into the Aquarius, Uranus,
that's
lightning
Aquarius and Uranus.
Things are speeding up. That's the beautiful thing is that, and this is evolution in action, that we can actually burn through our stuff or take a quantum leap in our awareness because of the work that our ancestors or our parents or our grandparents have done. We have access to these higher states of consciousness really quickly now.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go. So now we've been talking, so we've anchored in our 2000-year cycle.
Yeah.
Now we went into our like current 2020, 2021 cycle where we're in the dark part.
We're in the dark parts,
watching the death of the ego and all that good stuff. Now, what about 2022?
2022, yeah. So 2021, everybody was like, oh, it's just the Saturn Uranus square, no big deal. Well, it's because we're in this sort of slow burn right now. It's sort of like, we're beginning this new age of 2000 years, right? The ages are 2,150-ish years. So we're planting seeds in a lot of ways, but it's this like, like rubbing up against the old and trying to birth the new in a lot of ways is what we've been doing. And so coming into this next year, things are going to start to heat up again. And so I'm going to leap forward, but I'm not going to stay there very long as we're knowing that we're sort of sandwiching between the 2020, 3 planets in Capricorn. We're moving towards these massive shifts as well, which Pluto going into Aquarius. So we know that Saturn and Jupiter moved into Aquarius on the winter solstice of last year, right? A lot of astrologers feel like, oh, that was the true arrival into the Aquarian age. So many people disagree about when that happened. I mean,
oh yeah, we've had tons of debates on this show.
I know, right? It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah,
we're lost in the Pisces for a reason we're not supposed to know.
Yeah. Right. But we're cusping, just
we're
like
cusping. We're about to know. We're going to find it.
Right. And so these last degrees of Pluto through Capricorn is the continual decay and the revealing of the underworld in a lot of ways in relation to the Capricorn archetype, which has been the last 2,000 years of the system that is decaying, right? And so before we can emerge into this new Aquarian paradigm, which is us coming online as a human family and starting to work in harmony with the elements, because so many people have that awareness now and are having more of our unification with all of life, that it's not about, utilizing and stripping the resources. It's actually about honoring them and coming together and working in that way. We need to think of ourselves as farmers. We're planting seeds for that future. We will not see a lot of these massive shifts in our lifetime. We will have access to these higher states of consciousness, thankfully, where we can live in the majesty of our awareness. But the earth itself and the systems are going to take a very long time to reconstruct. So we have to see ourselves on the ground. And I think that's the Uranus. We have the idealism of this new world, and Saturn saying, well, make it real. We don't want the system to completely collapse. We're completely dependent on it. And so it's one thing to think, yay, kumbaya, us all come together and live in communities. It's a lot of work, and we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely necessary that we really take seriously preparing for the system to continue to collapse, maybe in moments, weeks, or months, or who knows, to become more sustainable, sovereign, and work with the elements on the land. So moving more specifically into this year, the things that really kind of stood out to me is this really the movement, then the continual journey of the Jupiter and the Saturn coming into contact with Neptune, right? And it's going to start closing in, which starts Let's see. Well, actually, did you want to talk about, there's something in February that you mentioned that you
Oh,
may
I thought
mention.
you were, I'm sorry.
That's okay. This is the thing that I've been really watching, but you had mentioned something. I don't want to go too far ahead.
Oh, I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about. So,
Are you talking about the nodal shift, maybe?
well, I thought we were about to talk about the nodal shift. So,
Oh, we're gonna talk
yeah, no.
right. Sorry. The nodal shift happens in January. So
Yeah, that's fair. Let's go in order.
From Sagittarius, Gemini to Taurus, Scorpio. Yeah, 100%. So if we're talking about the evolution of the collective soul, then we're going from, the axis of mind and knowledge into more of the axis of power and emotion and resource and the darkness and all the scorpionic elements. And so I know a lot of people are quite concerned about that shift. We've been really dealing with, as we talked about, belief, information, the mind and our understanding of reality, and then shifting now into this South Node in Scorpio, where we're going to really, I think, experience and have to come to grips with deeper levels of intensity and darkness.
Wow. So you think, I also know a lot of people cheering on the nodal shift because the mental logic labyrinth that is really, everybody's been in a discussion with someone who it's like literally you get to the point where it's like, wow, this is pointless. Like you see it this way, I see it this way. Let's just love each other and move on. But I think from that perspective, it seems like some of that aggravation of the mind and the arguing and debating and all that would be coming to a little bit more of a close and moving into a Taurus Scorpio kind of energy. What will that shift be like?
Well, as you were speaking, when it came to me, some of the symbols that I used for where we are now is Sagittarius is like a central node with its mind wanting to go in multiple directions and study everything, like arrows going in different directions. And then opposing that is Gemini going in two opposite directions all the time. Mm-hmm. So we've been caught in that so that mind, like you described as a mind matrix. And at some point it becomes pointless we're so divided by our mind. Right. As we're moving into this next nodal shift, it becomes about, part of it has to do with embodying that with Taurus. We're taking on some physical structure with that shift and Scorpio. So these are two different points I like to talk about. If you think about it in terms of the chakra, it's the sexual chakra as a Scorpio, and the Taurus is the throat chakra. So you're working with these two energies at a chakra level as well. We need to voice what is at our deep. We need to talk about, what is at the deepest level of our pain and what's happening in our society. We don't need to hide from it anymore. It's time for the division about it to come to end. It's not just about the getting lost in the mind, the media part of it, the propaganda part of it. We don't need to get pulled into that anymore. What are we going to do about it now? And what's really happening underneath it all? So anyway, that's how I see part of that shift. And I know Shannon can speak more to that. So.
Well, I actually don't think that it's going to end the mental part of it, division. I think it's going to become more extreme. That's my personal. I think that the
but that's. I feel like that's being caused by a few more aspects.
But it's going to take a backdrop in a way, is the way I see it. And so when the shift of the nodes goes into Scorpio Taurus, I think there's going to be more revealing of the darkness. Yeah. Okay. And now when I speak about that term, Russell and I often talk about how we need to come up with a new languaging for the new age, because I don't want to imply that it's evil or anything that I'm trying not to polarize. However, we are coming through, we're wanting to reconstruct a system. We're wanting to construct something that was not life affirming, of the previous age and some of the constructs and some of the processes that we went through. And so we're sort of purging still. And so I think that, this word gets thrown around a lot right now, that we are living in the time of the apocalypse. I 100% agree with the understanding that what does it mean? It means the time of the great revealing. The revealing of what? The revealing of the truth. Yes. So I actually see 2022 as escalating some of that. That there is going to potentially be some revealing on more of a global scale of some of the darkness that we have not seen yet, wanted to look at, didn't want to believe, on the one hand. So that's just, again, there's different vantage points. So that's sort of from a consensus or a 3D level. But at the same time, some of those aspects are happening, which I was sort of alluding to in April and May. There's going to be this massive creative potential for an expansion and a spiritual upgrade for a lot of people as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're looking at what for that? The April is the Jupiter Neptune.
Jupiter, Neptune. Yeah. So there's like increments that are going to happen with Jupiter coming into Neptune, and right. So Jupiter expands.
Yeah.
Of course, we know that. And Neptune is like our hopes and dreams. It's our spiritual connection. So it could be like a lot of people really manifesting and really coming online with their fifth dimensional self. Shadow of Neptune is delusion, right? It's deception, right? So revealing Jupiter truth about. A lot of people are calling it the revealing of the greatest deception of all the times.
Yeah.
So whatever that means, we don't need to go into. And then the planets keep on coming, and there's some other, connections. I have to look at my notes because my mind doesn't do the minutia very well. But then Mars is going to also enter Pisces. And then is going to, we're going to go into an eclipse season, right? Which of course just accelerates everything also in April. And so anytime we're in eclipse season, for the viewers that maybe don't know, it's when a newer full moon is conjunct the nodal axis. And we already talked about how it's moved into Scorpio, Taurus. So we're talking about this axis of understanding the connection between the shadow and the material. And I want to talk a little bit about what the North Node in Taurus is asking of us. But just to say, to complete my thought, it's going to expand or accelerate, I think, this process that we're in. And then Mars comes in, is going to also conjunct the planets of Jupiter and Neptune, which is going to bring fire to a lot of the dynamics that are going on already, moving towards something that's, I feel like, is culminating in August, which is when Mars speeds up and ends up conjunct Uranus. So Mars is going to come in, it's going to hit all three planets, and then it's going to hit Uranus and the North Node. And so there's something about, we know Mars and Uranus that's explosive. With the North Node, it's faded. Right? So it could be just like a huge ascension or a huge destruction that's faded, right?
And this is August, you said, of 2022?
It could be
It's August 1st. It's at 18 degrees Taurus, Mars conjunct Uranus at the North Node. And it's squaring Saturn. So it has to do with this battle, power battle that we're in. But what I want to say about this, I think, this shift into the nodal axis of Scorpio, Taurus, is that I see this a lot with my clients, and I've even experienced it in my own evolution, is that on the personal level, it's easy to get lost in the story and in the shadow, and there's another layer to heal, and there's another wound, and my mother did this, and then and it's like the drama, right? Like the round and round.
Yes.
Okay, so we can see that on the personal level, but we can also see where we may get kind of stuck in this cauldron of chaos, because it's not just the virus, it's BLM, it's the global, unrest, it's so many things going on that we're just like, there's just shadow everywhere. So I think our challenge as a collective is going to be to reach for that North Node in Taurus is simplicity, pleasure, being in the moment, accessing. And this brings me back to why I entered expressive arts and healing in the first place. That's what healed me: dance, music, art, because those are tapping into higher frequencies. And if we can get out of the 3D story of we're in this like global war, which we are, then we can realize we can actually simplify our reality by focusing on the only things we can control, which is our own happiness. So we're actually, our body of work is the technology of joy and happiness lately, because we're coming out of our own, dark night of the soul, which was important for our twin flame evolution. And also we feel like we're guiding that in a way, which another thing that feels really significant on a larger scale is that the decan that we are experiencing in the beginning of the Aquarian age is the first 700 years, right? A third of the decan of the sign is Libra. So therefore, obviously we're working with union of duality, but relationship and partnership and love and all of those things are also places that we can find refuge, and we can work on our own internal alchemy and find our higher states of bliss without getting too caught up in what's going on around us.
Can I add an etymological aspect to that? So when thinking of it in these large terms, the Libra decan is known as the zygon in Greek. And this concept, moving backwards in the zodiac, actually is a reference to that which is many becoming one again, like focusing back to the first cell of its own creation through the zygote. Literally, zygon and zygote are related etymologically. So it's trying to tell you something through this use of language, the higher language. If you connect the myths through the conscious understanding, you can begin to understand what's happening at this next level of consciousness as we move forward in the age. So anyway, I wanted to add that in the context just by thinking in mythological terms. Yeah. So.
Love that. Okay. So we're at August. Is there anything else you want to point out about 2022?
Well, we had talked about some key dates that affect the United States.
Yes.
So if you're a historian, you may know a little bit about this with the date of February 18th as the Neptune return at 22 Pisces. So the last time this happened in the United States natal chart when Neptune was at 22 Virgos, this happens once every 165 years, and this was a prelude to the American Civil War. So there's a key signature of the Civil War here, and you see this repeated again with World War II in September in 1939. There was a prelude to war as a key signature here. So we're at that point again on February next year, February 18th. And interestingly enough, I'm a fan of Joe Rogan and his podcasts, and I listen to them. And I have been hearing many of his key level guests discuss the possibility of civil war in this country openly on the air.
Yep.
And that just strikes me as a huge change in consciousness that has happened in the last 12 months, so that people are talking about it, and we're actually going to reach some of these key signatures where it's happened before in the past as we enter a revolutionary time. So that's a key thing for me. Like next year, the vibratory field, we're getting more radical to what we may possibly do to make these changes happen. So
yeah. Russ, do you think that this has any hearkening back to the 2017 Great American Eclipse that literally cut our country in half?
I had not thought of it that way personally, but yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it just symbolically, yes, there's going to be this left and right, higher, lower, even multicultural division that happens. It's going to continue to divide. And you have to rise above that. It is part of the consciousness process happening in this country. It's to rise above the division, and only a few people are going to be able to do that. It's going to, unfortunately, I think the country is going to be sort of decay into itself in some way. I think we've got a long ride, but underneath that all, higher consciousness is already doing its work. The infrastructure for what's needed next, the cryptocurrencies, all of these things are already in place. And we have to support this next level of consciousness that's being provided by the technology. So it's like, things are going to change. You better get on board and make the change. We're speaking that too, And
it's not just our country.
Yeah.
I mean, if you get on any kind of alternative news forum, you see there's uprisings going on all over the world. We don't see them on our news. It's all censored, right?
Yeah.
And, we know that we're moving towards this Pluto entering Aquarius. So if we look back in history, when Pluto has entered Aquarius in the past, it's been a global revolution. There's been revolutions all over the world.
Wow.
So
when does Pluto go into Aquarius?
I think it's March
March
23rd,
23rd,
2023. And
Yeah.
it's going to retrograde back and forth over the 0 point, like, 3 times. So between 2023 and 2025, yeah, this feels like
It's
the sort of
revolutionary.
the pre-show in a
Yeah.
way of what's coming.
Mm.
Which is why, again, my best advice to my clients is sovereignty, sustainability, and then working on your own frequency so that you can stay in a high state, knowing you're eternal, so that we can just walk through this. We're going through, the shadow of the Aquarius archetype first. Unfortunately, I think we all hope we'd arrive and be like singing Kumbaya together.
Totally.
If we think about us all working as the archetype of Aquarius, the song and everything, where we're all like holding hands, it's very much the opposite. The narrative is to fear each other, to stay away from each other, can't even see each other with the mask.
It's the shadow.
I mean, it's just like looking at it just from a symbolic phase, we see like this is the exact opposite of what we know that is the essence of Aquarius. So I think that it's like an enantiodrama, like the rubber band pulling back so far in a certain direction that it's going to propel us forward into the light. But we have to go through this dark tunnel of birth. And we know birth is nonlinear, it's bloody, it's
it's chaotic.
Chaotic.
And amazing. And totally transformative.
And totally absolutely necessary and natural, right?
And natural. And not controllable.
Yeah.
I mean, we can try to control it, but that usually backfires. So okay, so a couple more dates for the US and then we're going to need to wrap up, but I have one more question for you at the end, but you've given us so much to work with already. I'm like, I got 2022 covered. Like, here we go.
Well, October and November, I mean, I feel like the hot months are generally speaking are February. And then we talked about how in April, the conjunctions happen and then moving into the eclipse season, April and May, and then August, everything feels like it's culminating. And then we're going to go, September's a little bit mild. And then we go into October, which is another eclipse season. And Jupiter's going to retrograde again back into Pisces, and Mars is also going to be retrograding during that time. So that just feels like a lot of review around everything we're trying to understand around we're still going to be bombarded with division and of information, but things are going to be more volatile. So I think it's going to be, how do we reorient ourselves to a future that is that we can't see, that we're going to have faith upon, that we're going to actually have to be the pioneers of. If we think about Mars, it's very active this year. The highest when Mars is activating these outer planets is to orient our personal will with higher will. Our personal will, Mars, with Uranus, with the new age, with the new energies, with coming online with the AI, all of it. We have no choice. It's coming. It's here, right? So pushing against, the more that we can resist the tendency to judge, to polarize, to demonize, that this agenda or these people that think differently, that chose differently, that there's something wrong, the quicker we're going to accelerate our ascension process, because we have to remember we're trying to come back into union. So that means union with all of it, trusting all of it, letting our neighbors have their experience, allowing, whatever is erupting in our neighborhoods, to understand that if there is a mass exodus of souls off the planet, they chose to leave, to sacrifice for this time of the Great Awakening. And so we can trust from an eternal perspective that we're moving in a good direction. The message that I get all the time is that this is not something happening to us, it's happening for us. And we were born for this time. We chose to be here at this time. And so we just need to do the things that make us happy and take care of our neighbors,
Wow.
take care of one another.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. It's a daily mantra for me. Life is happening for us. Life is happening for me. Life is happening for you. Life is happening for us. And it automatically puts me in a different state. I mean, even if I'm looking around going, oh my God, but it really doesn't seem like it. It's like just even saying that and feeling it for a moment, it's like, well, it's true. It's true somewhere. It is true, even if it doesn't look that way. Yeah. Wow, you two. I was able to just like literally draw your heat map as you were speaking. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I've never done that before, but I like having like the map of like, okay, it's pretty chill. And then we got some like peaks of energy and they're happening. It sounds like April, May, August, October, November or no, October.
Let's see. I have to get my chart out. Jupiter returns to Aries in December 20th. And so,
December.
I'm not sure
Yeah,
that
December.
I think that, again, like I have a hard time saying like that everything's going to be cool anytime this year. I just don't believe that.
There's levels of intensity. There's
levels of intensity,
Yeah.
and yeah, those are the hot months. And but also remembering that that's only on the world stage, on
Right.
this one perspective. We can be having the time of our lives. We're living out at a pyramid.
right.
Right? We're doing the higher
Exactly.
work. We're enjoying our family. We're planting gardens and getting chickens, and we're returning back to Taurus, the earth. So that's again coming out of the intensity of the transformation and the darkness of what's going on in the world, and simplifying, coming back into what gives us pleasure, the natural way, going back to, Uranus. Let's take advantage of that higher consciousness into the earth, and let's build these new earth grids and get technologically savvy with our food and all the things that we can
Like
do.
the ancient Egyptians, they were pretty technologically savvy with the earth.
Mhm.
Yeah. Fascinating. You two, this has been so much fun. I feel like we've just been on this like wild journey together and it's been awesome. My final question is, I'd just love to know, what do you love teaching students, astrology students? Like, is there a tool or technique that you love to teach?
Well, I just like to use science. Honestly, I like to put everything in a scientific language as much as possible, a higher mathematical language, and I like to do that. And I think that that's what's engaging the higher intellect right now. Is it starts with, what do we know about the world that we can talk about, and that removes us beyond this story, and that's the quantum mechanics behind it all. And you start realizing that is that is actually a spiritual process as well. You forget that quantum mechanics is a spiritual process. We just wait a minute, I'm part of all that process too. So it's like, what is it doing? And it's going through a phase shift. It's going through a change. And when you can think about it in scientific terms, I love to translate this language this way. That brings me to a higher state. And I know that it activates the higher mind to think in these terms, to bring it to a higher state. Yeah. So that's what I like.
It'd be fun to have you back and do more of that next time.
Yeah.
How about you, Shannon? What do you love to teach?
Yeah, I think, you got a taste of it today, reframing things, understanding things from a non-dual perspective, from more of a spiritual, holistic perspective. But then my greatest joy is bringing people into an experience of dance and into ceremony of getting out of the mind, actually, and having a direct experience of that sort of toroidal field that comes through our chakral system, through ancient technology, which is just rhythm and sound, and so that's a lot of my joy. And
ultimately we like putting the two together.
We do.
The mind and the body.
We love to
let the
create
spirit
sort of a
come.
holistic experience, and we are going to be doing that out here.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm so coming. I would love
to come dance at a pyramid.
Yeah, let's go have a pyramid dance party. That sounds amazing. All right, you two, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing so much of your wisdom. I actually just delight in experiencing your joy and experiencing your passion and enthusiasm. I think it's a great model for all of us. As it feels like the world is crumbling around us, we can still dance in pyramids. We can still be co-creating. We can still be learning and growing. And it's a good, hopeful message for all of us. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And thanks to all of you for being here. Thank you so much for being a part of our community. And thank you, as always, for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everybody. Are you looking for personalized guidance? Do you have questions about what you're meant to do and be in this lifetime? What you need in intimate relationships to really thrive? Or what major themes you'll be working with in the months to come? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you'll want to check out our personalized character and destiny and year ahead reports. These reports are perfect for you if you want professional insight into your astrology chart or year ahead. Written by internationally renowned astrologer Adrian Ross Duncan. Your character and destiny report provides deep insight into who you are and what you came here to do, your biggest strengths and challenges, and how your astrological design impacts your career and relationships. The Essential Year Ahead Report gives you insights into the major themes you'll be exploring in your career, your love life, personal development, and much more. For only $37, you can get your personalized astrology report delivered straight to your inbox within minutes. Just go to astrologyhub.com/reports to get yours today. That's astrologyhub.com/reports.